The city of Rome, once the heart of an empire that stretched from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, lies in ruins, not just in stone, but in memory. Its fall, a slow unraveling of power that spanned centuries, is a puzzle that historians, poets, and philosophers have tried to piece together for generations. Imagine a world where the mightiest civilization, a colossus of marble and iron, crumbles not in a single cataclysmic moment, but through 1,000 quiet fractures, each one eroding the foundations of an empire that seemed eternal. The story of Rome's decline is not merely a tale of battles lost or emperors slain. It is a saga of human ambition, environmental strain, economic collapse, and cultural shifts that together wove a tapestry of inevitable decay. To understand why Rome fell is to peer into the soul of a civilization and ask, what makes any society endure and what makes it falter? The answer lies not in one event, one villain, or one fatal flaw, but in a web of interconnected forces that, over time, proved too heavy for even Rome to bear. This is the story of how an empire that once commanded the known world slipped into shadow, leaving behind echoes of its glory and lessons for those who dare to listen. In the beginning, Rome was a city of farmers and shepherds, huddled along the banks of the Tiber River, its 7 hills offering modest protection from invaders. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, it had transformed into a republic, its legions marching forth to conquer neighbors and forge an empire. The Punic Wars against Carthage, fought between 264 and 146 before the Common Era, marked Rome's ascent as a Mediterranean superpower. The destruction of Carthage left Rome unrivaled, its coffers swelling with plunder and its territories expanding across North Africa, Spain, and Greece. Yet, even in this golden age, the seeds of decline were sown. The influx of wealth from conquests created vast disparities between the elite and the common people. Large estates, or latifundia, owned by wealthy senators, swallowed up small farms, forcing displaced farmers into crowded cities or into the ranks of the army. The Republic's political system, designed for a small city-state, strained under the weight of governing a sprawling empire. Corruption festered as ambitious men like Sulla and Pompey vied for power, their private armies clashing in civil wars that shook the Republic's foundations. By 27 before the Common Era, the Republic gave way to the empire under Augustus, a system that promised stability but traded liberty for autocracy. Augustus's reign, from 27 before the Common Era to 14 in the Common Era, was a time of relative peace, known as the Pax Romana. The empire's borders stretched across 3 continents, its roads and aqueducts knitting together diverse peoples under Roman law. Yet, beneath this veneer of prosperity, cracks were forming. The reliance on slave labor, captured from conquered territories, stifled innovation and created a volatile underclass. The empire's economy, heavily dependent on continuous expansion, began to falter as conquest slowed. By the 2nd century, under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, the empire reached its territorial zenith, but maintaining such vast borders required immense resources. The legions, once citizen soldiers loyal to Rome, became professional armies, whose loyalty often lay with their generals. Emperors like Commodus, who ruled from 180 to 192, squandered wealth and authority, indulging in personal excesses, while the empire's frontiers faced growing pressure from Germanic tribes and Persian armies. The Antonine Plague, a devastating epidemic that swept through the empire around 165 to 180, killed millions, decimating the population and weakening the military and economy. Tax revenues plummeted, and the empire struggled to replace lost soldiers and workers. The 3rd century brought crisis to a boiling point. Between 235 and 284, Rome endured the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, a period of near-constant turmoil. Over 50 emperors and usurpers rose and fell, many murdered by their own troops. Inflation spiraled as emperors debased the currency, minting coins with less silver to fund endless wars. Trade networks collapsed and cities shrank as people fled to the countryside to escape violence and taxation. Barbarian invasions intensified, with tribes like the Goths and Vandals breaching Roman frontiers. In 260, Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, a humiliation that symbolized Rome's vulnerability. The empire splintered, with breakaway regions like the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east challenging central authority. Only through the efforts of emperors like Aurelian, who ruled from 270 to 275, was the empire briefly reunited, but the cost was staggering. Aurelian's walls around Rome, still standing today, were a testament to a city no longer confident in its invincibility. The empire survived, but it was a shadow of its former self, its unity fragile, and its resources stretched thin. Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305, attempted to stabilize the empire through sweeping reforms. Recognizing that Rome was too vast for one ruler, he divided it into the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 co-emperors governing different regions. He reorganized the army, fixed prices to curb inflation, and expanded the bureaucracy to tighten control. Yet, these measures came at a cost. The bloated administration required heavy taxation, which crushed the lower classes and fueled resentment. Diocletian's persecution of Christians, one of the empire's fastest-growing communities, sowed discord and alienated a significant portion of the population. His reforms bought time, but they could not address the deeper issues: an economy addicted to conquest, a society divided by class and culture, and borders under relentless pressure. When Diocletian retired in 305, the Tetrarchy collapsed into civil war, paving the way for Constantine, who would reshape the empire's spiritual and political landscape. Constantine, ruling from 306 to 337, is best known for his embrace of Christianity, a faith that had spread despite persecution. The Edict of Milan in 313 granted tolerance to Christians, and Constantine's patronage elevated the religion's status. He founded Constantinople, a new capital in the east, strategically located on the Bosporus, and better positioned to defend against Persian and barbarian threats. This shift eastward marked a turning point, as the Western Empire began to wane in importance. Constantine's reign brought temporary stability, but his successors faced mounting challenges. The empire's wealth increasingly flowed to the east, leaving the west vulnerable. Germanic tribes, displaced by climate change and invasions from the Huns, pressed against the Rhine and Danube frontiers. In 376, the Visigoths, fleeing Hunnic attacks, sought refuge within Roman borders. Their mistreatment by corrupt officials sparked rebellion, culminating in the Battle of Adrianople in 378, where Emperor Valens was killed and the Roman army was routed. This defeat exposed the empire's military weaknesses and emboldened barbarian groups. The 4th century saw the empire increasingly divided, both geographically and culturally. Theodosius, the last emperor to rule a united empire from 379 to 395, made Christianity the official religion, uniting the empire spiritually but alienating pagans and other faiths. Upon his death, the empire was permanently split between his sons, Honorius in the west and Arcadius in the east. The Western Empire, plagued by weak leadership and economic decline, faced relentless invasions. In 410, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, sacked Rome itself, a shocking blow to a city that had stood unconquered for centuries. The psychological impact was profound, shaking the empire's sense of invincibility. Yet, the sack was not the end. The Western Empire limped on, its emperors often puppets of barbarian generals like Stilicho or Aetius, who struggled to hold back the tide of invasions while navigating internal betrayals. The environment, too, played a role in Rome's decline. Climate shifts, known as the Roman climate optimum, had once favored agriculture, but by the 4th century, cooler and wetter conditions reduced crop yields, straining food supplies. Deforestation and soil depletion, caused by centuries of intensive farming, further weakened the empire's agricultural base. Lead poisoning from pipes and wine vessels may have contributed to health problems among the elite, though its impact is debated. These environmental pressures compounded economic woes, as the empire struggled to feed its cities and armies. Meanwhile, the East, with its richer provinces and defensible capital, weathered these challenges better, setting the stage for its survival as the Byzantine Empire. By the early 5th century, the Western Empire was unraveling. The Vandals swept through Gaul and Spain, seizing North Africa, Rome's breadbasket, by 439. The loss of grain supplies left Rome starving. In 451, Attila the Hun threatened both halves of the empire, only to be repelled by a coalition led by Aetius. Yet, the empire's fate was sealed. In 455, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. The final blow came in 476, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor. The Senate sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern emperor as the sole ruler. The Western Empire was no more, its lands carved up by barbarian kingdoms. Yet, the East endured, preserving Roman law, culture, and Christianity for centuries. The fall of Rome was not a single event, but a process, driven by internal decay and external pressures. Economic stagnation, social inequality, military overreach, environmental stress, and cultural shifts all played their part. The empire's vastness, once its strength, became its weakness, as it struggled to hold together diverse peoples and distant frontiers. The rise of Christianity transformed its spiritual landscape, offering hope but also discord. Barbarian invasions, often portrayed as the cause, were more a symptom of Rome's inability to adapt. The empire's legacy, however, endures in its laws, languages, and ideas, which shaped the modern world. To study Rome's fall is to confront the fragility of even the greatest civilizations and to ponder what lessons remain for our own time. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden plunge into darkness, but a gradual descent, marked by moments of resilience and fleeting hopes of recovery. By the 5th century, the empire's western half was a fractured mosaic of struggling provinces, barbarian kingdoms, and a central authority that existed more in name than in power. The Eastern Empire, now centered in Constantinople, thrived in relative stability, its wealth and defensible geography shielding it from the chaos engulfing the West. Yet, the West's unraveling was not merely the result of external invasions or internal mismanagement. It was the culmination of centuries of systemic weaknesses, compounded by new pressures that the empire was ill-equipped to face. The story of this period is one of desperate attempts to hold together a crumbling edifice, of generals and emperors fighting against the tide, and of a society grappling with its own transformation. To trace the empire's final centuries is to witness the interplay of human decisions, natural forces, and historical momentum, each pushing Rome closer to its end. The 4th century had left the Western Empire vulnerable, its economy battered by inflation, its military stretched thin, and its political system plagued by weak leadership. The permanent division of the empire in 395, following the death of Theodosius, formalized a split that had been growing for decades. The Eastern Empire, with its prosperous cities like Antioch and Alexandria, benefited from fertile lands and bustling trade routes. The West, by contrast, relied heavily on North Africa for grain and faced constant threats along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Honorius, who inherited the Western throne at the age of 10, was ill-suited to rule. His reign, from 395 to 423, was dominated by regents and generals, most notably Stilicho, a half-Vandal commander who became the empire's de facto leader. Stilicho's efforts to defend the West were hampered by political intrigue and a lack of resources. In 401, he repelled a Visigothic invasion led by Alaric, but the victory was temporary. The empire's inability to integrate or decisively defeat barbarian groups like the Visigoths set the stage for further incursions. The sack of Rome by Alaric's Visigoths in 410 was a seismic event, not because it destroyed the city, Rome was no longer the empire's political heart, but because it shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. For centuries, the city had stood as a symbol of eternal power, its temples and forums a testament to a civilization that seemed destined to endure. The Visigoths' three-day plunder, though relatively restrained, sent shockwaves across the empire. Pagans blamed the rise of Christianity, arguing that abandoning the old gods had invited divine wrath. Christians, like the theologian Augustine, countered that Rome's fall was a consequence of moral decay, not a rejection of paganism. In his work, The City of God, begun in 413, Augustine argued that earthly empires were transient, and true salvation lay in a spiritual kingdom. This debate reflected a deeper cultural shift, as Christianity reshaped Roman identity, offering solace to some while alienating others who clung to traditional beliefs. The empire's troubles deepened in the decades following 410. The loss of North Africa to the Vandals, a Germanic tribe, was a crippling blow. By 429, under their leader Gaiseric, the Vandals crossed from Spain into Africa, capturing key cities like Carthage by 439. North Africa had been Rome's breadbasket, supplying grain to feed the city's population and the army. Its loss triggered food shortages and further strained the economy. The Vandals' control of the western Mediterranean also disrupted trade, cutting off vital revenues. Meanwhile, the Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia, emerged as a new threat. Under Attila, their king from 434 to 453, the Huns ravaged the Balkans and extorted tribute from the Eastern Empire. In 451, Attila turned west, invading Gaul. The Roman general Aetius, often called the last of the Romans, forged an alliance with the Visigoths and other barbarian groups to confront Attila at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. The battle was inconclusive, but it halted Attila's advance. A year later, Attila invaded Italy, only to withdraw after negotiations with Pope Leo I. His death, in 453, ended the Hunnic threat, but the West gained little respite. The empire's military was a shadow of its former self. The legions, once the backbone of Roman power, had become a patchwork of Roman recruits, barbarian mercenaries, and foederati, barbarian allies settled within the empire in exchange for military service. These forces were often unreliable, their loyalties divided between Roman paymasters and their own tribal leaders. The empire's inability to maintain a strong, centralized army left it dependent on men like Aetius, whose power rested on personal alliances rather than institutional strength. Aetius's assassination in 454 by Emperor Valentinian III, followed by Valentinian's own murder in 455, plunged the West into further chaos. The Vandal sack of Rome in 455, more destructive than Alaric's, underscored the empire's vulnerability. The Vandals looted the city for 2 weeks, carrying off treasures and captives, including the empress and her daughters. The event marked another psychological blow, as Rome's sacred status continued to erode. Economic decline was a relentless force in the empire's fall. The loss of wealthy provinces like North Africa and parts of Spain reduced tax revenues, while the cost of maintaining the army and bureaucracy remained high. Debasement of the currency, a practice begun in the 3rd century, had left coins nearly worthless, undermining trade and savings. The empire's reliance on slave labor, while still significant, was disrupted by the cessation of large-scale conquests, which had once supplied captives. Free laborers, burdened by heavy taxes and conscription, fled cities or sought protection from powerful landowners, giving rise to a proto-feudal system. Large estates became self-sufficient, further weakening central authority. Climate change exacerbated these woes. The Roman climate optimum, a period of warm, stable weather that had supported agriculture, gave way to cooler, wetter conditions by the 4th and 5th centuries. Crop failures and famines became more frequent, particularly in the West, where soil exhaustion from centuries of farming compounded the problem. The East, with its more resilient agricultural base, was better able to adapt. The empire's social fabric was also fraying. The divide between rich and poor had widened, with the senatorial elite hoarding wealth, while the lower classes faced poverty and exploitation. The rise of Christianity, while unifying in some respects, created tensions. Theodosius's edicts in the late 4th century had banned pagan worship, alienating traditionalists and sparking occasional revolts. The Christian Church, now a powerful institution, diverted resources to build basilicas and support clergy, competing with the state for funds. Meanwhile, the integration of barbarian groups into the empire was a double-edged sword, granting land to groups like the Visigoths and Ostrogoths in exchange for military service, preserved short-term stability but eroded Roman control. These groups retained their own leaders and customs, creating semi-autonomous enclaves within the empire. Over time, their growing power outstripped that of the Roman state, particularly in provinces like Gaul and Italy. The final decades of the Western Empire were marked by a rapid succession of emperors, most of whom were powerless figureheads. Between 455 and 476, 9 emperors ruled, their reigns often lasting mere months. The real power lay with barbarian generals like Ricimer, who controlled the army and installed or deposed emperors at will. In 475, Orestes, a Roman official, placed his young son, Romulus Augustulus, on the throne. The boy, barely a teenager, was the last Western emperor. In 476, Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, leading a coalition of barbarian troops, demanded land for his men. When Orestes refused, Odoacer overthrew Romulus Augustulus, declaring himself king of Italy. Rather than claim the imperial title, Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Emperor Zeno as the sole ruler. The act was symbolic, marking the end of the Western Empire as a political entity. Yet, life in Italy and other former provinces continued, with Roman law, culture, and infrastructure persisting under barbarian rule. The fall of the Western Empire was a complex tapestry woven from multiple threads. Economic collapse, driven by the loss of key provinces and unsustainable fiscal policies, left the state unable to function. Military weakness, compounded by reliance on barbarian forces, undermined defense. Environmental challenges, from climate shifts to soil degradation, strained resources. Social and cultural changes, including the rise of Christianity and the integration of barbarian groups, reshaped Roman society in ways that both strengthened and destabilized it. External pressures, from Vandal conquests to Hunnic invasions, exploited these weaknesses. Yet, the Eastern Empire's survival shows that Rome's fall was not inevitable. Its ability to adapt, through a stronger economy, a defensible capital, and pragmatic diplomacy, allowed it to endure as the Byzantine Empire. The West, burdened by geography and history, could not muster the same resilience. The legacy of Rome's fall is profound. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced the Western Empire, Visigothic Spain, Ostrogothic Italy, Frankish Gaul, preserved elements of Roman culture, blending them with their own traditions. The Catholic Church emerged as a unifying force, its bishops filling the vacuum left by imperial officials. Latin, the language of Rome, evolved into the Romance languages, while Roman law influenced medieval legal codes. The Eastern Empire, carrying the Roman mantle, thrived for nearly a millennium, its art, architecture, and scholarship shaping the medieval world. The fall of Rome was not the end of its story, but a transformation, its echoes resonating in the institutions, languages, and ideas that define the modern world. To reflect on this period is to see the fragility of power and the enduring impact of a civilization that, even in decline, refused to vanish. The Western Roman Empire's final days were not marked by a single, dramatic collapse, but by a slow erosion, a fading of authority that left its provinces to fend for themselves. By the mid-5th century, the empire was a patchwork of territories nominally under Roman control, but in reality, power had shifted to barbarian leaders, local elites, and the Church. The Eastern Empire, flourishing in Constantinople, stood as a stark contrast, its armies and economy robust enough to weather the storms that battered the West. Yet, the West's decline was not simply a tale of defeat. It was a story of adaptation, survival, and transformation as Roman institutions gave way to new forms of governance and culture. The forces that dismantled the empire, economic ruin, military weakness, environmental stress, and social upheaval, had been at work for centuries. But in the 5th century, they converged with devastating effect. To explore this period is to uncover the delicate balance between resilience and fragility, and to see how a civilization, even in its twilight, shaped the world that followed. The Vandal conquest of North Africa, completed by 439, had left the Western Empire reeling. The loss of Carthage and its grain supplies starved Rome's cities and armies, while the Vandals' control of the Western Mediterranean crippled trade. The empire's economy, already weakened by centuries of inflation and overtaxation, could not recover. The Western emperors, ruling from Ravenna rather than Rome, were often puppets of barbarian generals. Petronius Maximus, who briefly reigned in 455, exemplified the chaos. His assassination during the Vandal sack of Rome that year sparked a power vacuum. The Vandals' plunder, more systematic than the Visigoths in 410, stripped Rome of treasures accumulated over centuries, including relics from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, looted by Titus in 70. The city's population, once nearly 1 million, had dwindled to a fraction, its aqueducts and forums falling into disrepair. Yet, life continued, with local elites and the church stepping in to maintain order where the state had failed. The church, by the 5th century, was a pillar of stability in a fracturing world. Bishops, particularly the Bishop of Rome, later known as the Pope, wielded growing influence. Leo I, who served from 440 to 461, was a pivotal figure, negotiating with Attila the Hun in 452 and Gaiseric the Vandal in 455 to spare Rome from destruction. These interventions elevated the Church's authority, positioning it as a mediator between Romans and barbarians. Christianity also offered a unifying ideology, binding diverse peoples under a shared faith. Monasteries and churches became centers of learning, preserving Roman texts and traditions as secular institutions crumbled. Yet the Church's rise came with challenges. Its wealth, drawn from donations and land grants, rivaled that of the state, creating tensions with emperors and aristocrats. The spread of Christian doctrines also sparked theological disputes, such as the Arian controversy, which divided communities and complicated alliances with barbarian groups who often followed Arian Christianity. Barbarian integration was a defining feature of the 5th century. The empire had long settled Germanic tribes within its borders as foederati, granting them land in exchange for military service. By the 450s, these groups, Visigoths in Aquitaine, Burgundians in Gaul, Ostrogoths in Pannonia, held significant autonomy. Their leaders, like the Visigoth king Theodoric I, balanced Roman and barbarian identities, adopting Roman titles and laws while maintaining tribal customs. This blending created a hybrid culture visible in the mosaics of Ravenna, where barbarian warriors were depicted in Roman attire. Yet, it also weakened central authority. The empire's reliance on barbarian armies meant that generals like Ricimer, a Suebian who dominated the West from 456 to 472, held more power than emperors. Ricimer's string of puppet emperors, including Libius Severus and Anthemius, underscored the empire's fragility. His death in 472 left the West without a unifying figure, accelerating its collapse. Environmental factors continued to exacerbate the empire's woes. The cooling climate of the late Antique Little Ice Age, beginning around the 4th century, reduced agricultural yields in the West, particularly in Gaul and Britain. Deforestation and soil erosion, the legacy of Roman intensive farming, made recovery difficult. Famine and disease followed, weakening populations already strained by war and taxation. The East, with its fertile Nile and Anatolian farmlands, was less affected, but the West's dependence on North African grain, now lost, proved catastrophic. Lead poisoning from water pipes and wine vessels may have contributed to health issues among the elite, though its role is debated. These environmental pressures, combined with economic decline, created a vicious cycle. Fewer crops meant less tax revenue, which meant fewer soldiers, which left provinces vulnerable to raids and rebellions. The Huns, though their threat receded after Attila's death in 453, had reshaped the empire's borders. Their invasions had driven Germanic tribes into Roman territory, creating a domino effect of displacement. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Vandals, all fleeing Hunnic pressure, became both Rome's allies and its conquerors. By the 460s, the empire's frontiers were porous, with barbarian kingdoms carving out territories in Gaul, Spain, and Italy. Majorian, emperor from 457 to 461, was a rare exception to the parade of weak rulers. He launched campaigns to reclaim Gaul and Spain, defeating the Visigoths and restoring Roman rule in parts of Hispania. His attempt to retake North Africa, however, ended in disaster when the Vandals destroyed his fleet in 460. Betrayed by Ricimer, Majorian was deposed and executed, his death marking the last serious effort to revive the Western Empire. His successors, like Olybrius and Glycerius, were powerless, their reigns measured in months. Britain, once a prosperous province, was abandoned by the early 5th century. The legions, recalled to defend Italy, left the island vulnerable to Saxon raids. By 410, Emperor Honorius reportedly told the Britons to defend themselves, effectively severing ties. Local leaders, like the legendary Ambrosius Aurelianus, organized resistance, laying the groundwork for the myths of King Arthur. In Gaul, the Franks, under leaders like Childeric, began consolidating power, their kingdom later becoming the foundation of medieval France. Spain fell to the Visigoths and Suebi, while Italy became a battleground for competing factions. The empire's administrative structure, once a marvel of organization, collapsed as tax collection faltered and communication between provinces broke down. Governors and senators turned to local solutions, fortifying villas and raising private armies, a precursor to feudalism. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 by Odoacer is often cited as the end of the Western Empire, but it was less a cataclysm than a formality. Odoacer, a barbarian general of mixed Herule and Syrian descent, ruled Italy as a king under the nominal authority of the Eastern Emperor Zeno. He maintained Roman laws and institutions, employing Roman administrators and minting coins in the emperor's name. Life for most Italians changed little. The Senate still met, and the church continued to grow. Yet, the absence of a Western emperor marked a symbolic shift. The Eastern Empire, now the sole heir to Rome's legacy, focused on its own survival, leaving the West to fragment. Odoacer's rule was short-lived. In 493, he was overthrown by Theodoric the Ostrogoth, sent by Zeno to restore order. Theodoric's kingdom in Italy preserved Roman culture, its capital at Ravenna, a center of art and learning, but it was no longer an empire. The fall of the West was not the end of Rome's influence. The Eastern Empire, or Byzantine Empire, carried forward Roman law, engineering, and Christianity, its capital a beacon of civilization. In the West, barbarian kings adopted Roman titles and customs, their courts blending Germanic and Latin traditions. The Church, with its network of bishops and monasteries, preserved literacy and scholarship, copying manuscripts that would inspire the Renaissance. Roman roads, aqueducts, and cities, though often in disrepair, remained the backbone of medieval Europe. The Latin language, evolving into French, Spanish, and Italian, ensured Rome's linguistic legacy. Even in decline, Rome's ideas of law, governance, and faith endured, shaping the medieval and modern worlds. The causes of the West's fall were manifold. Economic collapse, driven by the loss of North Africa and unsustainable taxation, starved the state. Military reliance on barbarian troops eroded loyalty and cohesion. Environmental degradation and climate shifts undermined agriculture, while social changes, from Christianization to barbarian integration, reshaped identity. External invasions, from Vandals to Huns, exploited these weaknesses. But they were not the sole cause. The empire's vastness, once its strength, became a liability. Its resources spread too thin to maintain control. The East's survival highlights the role of geography and adaptability. Constantinople's walls and trade routes gave it advantages the West lacked. To study this period is to see a civilization at a crossroads, its end, not a failure but a transformation, its legacy a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and resilience. The Western Roman Empire's twilight was a time of quiet disintegration, where the grandeur of its past lingered in crumbling cities and fading institutions, yet the seeds of a new world were taking root. By the late 5th century, the empire was less a unified state than a collection of fragmented regions, each governed by a mix of Roman remnants, barbarian rulers, and the rising power of the Christian Church. The Eastern Empire, secure in Constantinople, continued to project Roman authority, its wealth and military might a distant dream for the struggling West. The forces that had eroded the empire, economic collapse, military disarray, environmental decline, and cultural shifts, reached their climax, but they did not erase Rome's legacy. Instead, they reshaped it, blending Roman traditions with barbarian vitality to lay the foundations of medieval Europe. To delve into this era is to witness the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a moment when the old order gave way to something new, fragile, and full of possibility. The Vandal sack of Rome in 455 had left the city wounded, its treasures plundered, and its prestige further diminished. The empire's heart, now beating faintly in Ravenna, was ruled by emperors who were little more than figureheads. Avitus, who reigned from 455 to 456, was a Gallo-Roman aristocrat backed by the Visigoths, but his brief rule ended in deposition by Ricimer, the barbarian general who dominated the West. Ricimer's power was emblematic of the empire's state, a Roman system reliant on non-Roman hands. His succession of puppet emperors, Majorian, Libius Severus, Anthemius, reflected a desperate attempt to maintain the facade of imperial authority. Majorian, ruling from 457 to 461, stood out as a capable leader, campaigning to restore Roman control in Gaul and Spain. His victories against the Visigoths and Suebi briefly rekindled hopes of revival, but his ambition to retake North Africa was thwarted when the Vandals destroyed his fleet in 460. Betrayed by Ricimer, Majorian was executed, and with him died the last serious effort to rebuild the Western Empire. The loss of North Africa remained a mortal wound. The Vandals, under Gaiseric, had transformed Carthage into a pirate haven, their ships raiding Mediterranean coasts and choking trade. The Western Empire, stripped of its richest province, could not feed its people or fund its armies. The grain that once flowed from Africa to Rome's ports was gone, and the city's population, already reduced by centuries of decline, faced starvation. The empire's economy was in tatters, its currency debased to the point of worthlessness. Taxes, levied on an ever-shrinking pool of citizens, were often collected through coercion, driving farmers and artisans into the arms of powerful landowners. These magnates, operating vast estates, offered protection in exchange for labor, creating a system that foreshadowed feudalism. The urban centers of the West, Rome, Mediolanum, Trier, shrank as trade routes collapsed and people fled to the countryside, seeking safety in a world of growing insecurity. The military, once Rome's pride, was a hollow shell. The legions, diminished by budget cuts and recruitment shortages, relied heavily on barbarian mercenaries and foederati. These troops, often Visigoths, Franks, or Burgundians, fought for pay or land, not loyalty to Rome. Their commanders, like Ricimer or Gundobad, held the real power, using emperors as tools to legitimize their rule. The empire's borders, particularly along the Rhine and Danube, were indefensible. In Britain, abandoned by Rome around 410, local warlords and Romano-British elites struggled against Saxon invaders, their pleas for aid ignored. In Gaul, the Franks under Childeric, who died in 481, were consolidating power, their victories over rival tribes and Roman remnants laying the groundwork for Clovis, who would unite the Franks into a major kingdom. Spain was divided between the Visigoths and Suebi, while Italy became a battleground for internal factions and external raiders. The Church's role grew ever more central. By the 460s, bishops were not just spiritual leaders but civic authorities, managing food distribution, negotiating with barbarian chiefs, and maintaining Roman law in their dioceses. Gelasius I, Bishop of Rome from 492 to 496, articulated the principle of two powers, arguing that spiritual authority, held by the Church, was distinct from and superior to secular rule. This idea, though not fully realized in his time, set the stage for the medieval papacy's influence. Monasteries, spreading across Gaul and Italy, became refuges for scholarship, preserving Latin texts and Roman engineering knowledge. The Church also bridged the divide between Romans and barbarians, converting tribes like the Franks to Orthodox Christianity. This process was not without conflict. Arianism, favored by many Germanic groups, clashed with Catholic orthodoxy, creating tensions that complicated alliances. Environmental challenges continued to undermine the West. The cooler, wetter climate of the late antique Little Ice Age disrupted agriculture, particularly in marginal regions like northern Gaul and Britain. Crop failures led to famines, weakening populations already ravaged by disease. The plague of Justinian, which struck the Eastern Empire in 541 and later reached the West, was a grim preview of the pandemics that would plague medieval Europe, though its impact on the 5th century West is less documented. Soil exhaustion from centuries of overfarming reduced yields, while deforestation limited fuel and building materials. These pressures hit the West harder than the East, where fertile lands and better infrastructure cushioned the blow. The West's reliance on North African grain, now in Vandal hands, left it uniquely vulnerable, its cities and armies unable to sustain themselves. Barbarian kingdoms were not merely destroyers but heirs to Rome's legacy. The Visigoths in Spain, under kings like Euric, who ruled from 466 to 484, adopted Roman administrative practices, issuing law codes that blended Germanic and Roman traditions. In Italy, Odoacer's rule from 476 to 493 maintained Roman institutions, with the Senate still functioning and Roman officials managing taxes. His deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 was less a revolution than a pragmatic shift. By sending the imperial regalia to Constantinople, Odoacer acknowledged the Eastern emperor's nominal sovereignty while ruling as king. His kingdom was stable, but its reliance on Ostrogothic mercenaries sowed the seeds of its downfall. In 489, Theodoric the Ostrogoth, commissioned by Emperor Zeno, invaded Italy, defeating Odoacer in 493. Theodoric's reign, lasting until 526, was a high point of Romano-barbarian synthesis, his court at Ravenna producing art and architecture that rivaled Constantinople's. The Eastern Empire, meanwhile, was adapting to new realities. Under emperors like Anastasius, who ruled from 491 to 518, the East reformed its currency, strengthened its defenses, and balanced diplomacy with military force. Constantinople's walls, built under Theodosius II, made it nearly impregnable, while its position on trade routes ensured wealth. The East's ability to integrate barbarian groups, like the Isaurians, and to deflect threats like the Persians, allowed it to thrive. The West, lacking such advantages, fragmented into smaller polities. Yet, this fragmentation was not chaos, but a reordering. The barbarian kingdoms preserved Roman law, language, and Christianity, adapting them to new contexts. The Franks, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths saw themselves as successors to Rome, not its enemies, their rulers styling themselves as consuls or patricians. The fall of the West was a confluence of failures and adaptations. Economic ruin from lost provinces and debased currency crippled the state. Military dependence on barbarians eroded central authority, while environmental decline starved the population. The rise of the Church and the integration of barbarian groups reshaped society, creating a hybrid culture that carried Roman ideas forward. The East's survival underscores the role of geography and flexibility. The West, burdened by vulnerable borders and a weaker economy, could not endure. Yet, Rome's legacy persisted in the laws, languages, and faiths of its successors. The Senate continued to meet in Rome into the 6th century, and Roman roads carried trade and armies for centuries. The fall was not an end, but a transformation, a shift from empire to a mosaic of kingdoms that would shape the medieval world. To reflect on this period is to see the resilience of human societies, even in decline. Rome's institutions, though weakened, provided a framework for the future, its culture, a wellspring for art, law, and religion. The barbarian kings, far from savage destroyers, were builders of a new order, their realms the precursors of modern Europe. The Church, with its vision of universal salvation, offered continuity in a fractured world. The story of Rome's end is not one of failure, but of evolution, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are mortal, yet their echoes can shape the course of history long after their fall. The Western Roman Empire's final century was a shadow play of its former glory, where the trappings of imperial power, crowns, titles, and ceremonies masked a reality of fragmentation and decay. By the late 5th century, the empire was a ghost, its authority confined to pockets of Italy and Gaul, while barbarian kingdoms rose to fill the void. The Eastern Empire, thriving in Constantinople, stood as a beacon of continuity, its golden domes and bustling markets a world apart from the West's crumbling cities. Yet, even in decline, the West was not barren. It was a crucible of change, where Roman traditions mingled with barbarian vigor, and the Christian Church emerged as a unifying force. The forces that brought the empire low, economic collapse, military weakness, environmental strain, and social upheaval, were relentless, but they also gave birth to a new order. To explore this era is to see the death of an empire and the birth of a civilization, a moment when the past and future met in a delicate, transformative dance. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 by Odoacer marked the symbolic end of the Western Empire, but it was not a cataclysm. Odoacer, a barbarian leader of mixed Germanic and Hunnic descent, ruled Italy as king, maintaining Roman institutions like the Senate and tax system. His decision to send the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging Emperor Zeno as the sole Roman ruler, was a pragmatic gesture, not a surrender. Life in Italy continued much as before, with Roman law governing cities and the Church managing welfare. Odoacer's reign, from 476 to 493, was relatively stable, his administration blending Roman efficiency with barbarian military might. He minted coins bearing Zeno's image, repaired aqueducts, and patronized Christian churches, presenting himself as a legitimate successor to Roman authority. Yet, his reliance on Ostrogothic mercenaries, led by Theodoric, proved his undoing. Theodoric, an Ostrogoth raised in Constantinople, was sent by Zeno in 489 to reclaim Italy. After a 4-year campaign, he defeated Odoacer in 493, treacherously killing him at a banquet. Theodoric's rule, lasting until 526, was a high point of post-Roman Italy. His kingdom, centered in Ravenna, was a model of Romano-barbarian synthesis. He employed Roman administrators, like the philosopher Boethius, to govern, restored public buildings, and issued laws that applied to both Romans and Goths. Ravenna's churches, adorned with dazzling mosaics, reflected a fusion of Christian and classical aesthetics. Theodoric styled himself as a Roman patrician, yet retained his Gothic identity, balancing the needs of his diverse subjects. His reign offered a glimpse of what the West might have become, a hybrid civilization preserving Rome's legacy while embracing new blood. But his death in 526 sparked succession crises, and his kingdom fell to the Eastern Empire's reconquest under Justinian. The Eastern Empire, under Justinian, who ruled from 527 to 565, sought to restore the Roman world. His general Belisarius reconquered North Africa from the Vandals in 533 and Italy from the Ostrogoths by 554, briefly reuniting parts of the West with the East. Yet, these victories were fleeting. The cost of Justinian's wars drained the treasury, and the plague of Justinian, a devastating pandemic from 541 to 549, killed millions, weakening both halves of the empire. Italy, ravaged by decades of conflict, was left depopulated and vulnerable to new invaders, like the Lombards, who seized much of the peninsula in 568. Justinian's dream of a restored Rome faded, but his codification of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, became a cornerstone of Western legal tradition, influencing medieval and modern jurisprudence. In the West, barbarian kingdoms solidified their power. The Franks under Clovis, who ruled from 481 to 511, united Gaul into a formidable kingdom. Clovis's conversion to Catholic Christianity in 496 won him the support of the Church and Gallo-Roman elites, distinguishing his realm from Arian Visigoths and Ostrogoths. His Merovingian dynasty laid the foundations of modern France, its capitals at Paris and Metz echoing Roman urbanism. The Visigoths, under kings like Alaric II, who ruled until 507, dominated Spain, their law codes blending Roman and Germanic traditions. In Britain, abandoned by Rome, Romano-British communities resisted Saxon invaders, their struggles giving rise to legends of Arthur. These kingdoms, though distinct, shared a common thread. They saw themselves as heirs to Rome, adopting its language, faith, and administrative practices. The Church was the West's greatest unifying force. By the 6th century, bishops were de facto governors in many cities, managing resources and negotiating with barbarian kings. Gregory the Great, Bishop of Rome from 590 to 604, exemplified this role. He organized Rome's defenses, fed its poor, and sent missionaries to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Britain, laying the groundwork for a Christian Europe. Monasteries, like those founded by Benedict of Nursia around 529, became centers of learning, copying Roman texts and preserving knowledge through the chaos. The Church's moral authority filled the vacuum left by the empire, its rituals and doctrines offering hope to a fractured world. Yet its wealth and influence created tensions with secular rulers, setting the stage for medieval conflicts between church and state. Economic life in the West had transformed. The vibrant trade networks of the Pax Romana were gone, replaced by localized economies. Cities like Rome and Trier shrank, their populations unable to sustain grand infrastructure. Roman roads, though still used, fell into disrepair, and long-distance commerce dwindled. Yet, rural estates thrived, their self-sufficiency a response to instability. These manors, worked by tenant farmers and protected by local lords, were the seeds of feudalism. The East, with its access to Asian and African trade, remained prosperous, its markets flooded with silk and spices. The West, cut off from these routes, turned inward, its economy agrarian and fragmented. Barter replaced coinage in many regions, a reflection of the empire's monetary collapse. Environmental pressures persisted. The late antique Little Ice Age continued to disrupt agriculture, with shorter growing seasons and unpredictable rains. In Gaul and Italy, marshes reclaimed farmland and rivers changed course, complicating trade and settlement. Deforestation, a legacy of Roman expansion, limited timber for construction and fuel, forcing communities to adapt. Disease, from smallpox to the plague of Justinian, decimated populations, particularly in urban centers. The East, with its denser cities, suffered greatly from the plague, but its agricultural base recovered faster. The West, already depopulated, struggled to rebuild, its labor shortages hastening the shift to manorial systems. The fall of the West was not a singular event, but a process, driven by interlocking crises. Economic collapse, from the loss of North Africa to currency debasement, starved the state. Military reliance on barbarian troops eroded central control, while environmental challenges weakened the population. The rise of Christianity and barbarian integration reshaped society, creating a new cultural synthesis. The East's survival, with its defensible capital and robust economy, highlights the West's unique vulnerabilities: exposed borders, a weaker tax base, and a fragmented elite. Yet the West's legacy endured. Roman law influenced barbarian codes, Latin evolved into Romance languages, and the Church preserved classical knowledge. The barbarian kingdoms, far from destroying Rome, built upon its foundations, their rulers blending Roman titles with Germanic traditions. To reflect on this period is to see a world in transition. The empire's fall was not a tragedy but a rebirth, its institutions giving way to new forms of governance and belief. The Franks, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths were not invaders, but partners in a new order. Their kingdoms, the precursors of modern Europe. The Church, with its vision of universal salvation, provided continuity, its missionaries spreading Rome's spiritual legacy. Roman roads, aqueducts, and ideas outlived the empire, shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of Rome's end is one of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of a civilization that, even in its final days, sowed the seeds of the future. The Western Roman Empire's fall was not a thunderous crash but a slow dissolution, its once mighty structures fading into a landscape of new kingdoms and shifting loyalties. By the late 5th and early 6th centuries, the West was no longer an empire but a mosaic of barbarian realms, each weaving Roman traditions into its own fabric. The Eastern Empire, radiant in Constantinople, carried the Roman name forward, its armies and wealth a stark contrast to the West's fragmented reality. Yet, the West's transformation was not a descent into chaos. It was a forging of new identities, where Roman law, Christian faith, and Germanic vigor blended to shape the medieval world. The forces that unraveled the empire, economic ruin, military fragility, environmental hardship, and cultural evolution, had reshaped it, leaving behind a legacy that endured in unexpected ways. To trace this period is to see a civilization reborn, its roots deep in the past, its branches reaching toward a future that still bears Rome's imprint. Theodoric's Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy from 493 to 526 was a beacon of stability in a fractured West. Educated in Constantinople, Theodoric ruled with a vision of harmony between Romans and Goths. He restored aqueducts, maintained Roman roads, and patronized scholars like Cassiodorus, whose writings preserved Roman administrative knowledge. His court in Ravenna produced masterpieces, like the Basilica of Santa Pollinare Nuovo, its mosaics blending Christian and classical motifs. Theodoric's laws respected Roman traditions, allowing Romans to live under their own legal codes while Goths followed tribal customs. He corresponded with Frankish and Visigothic kings, fostering a network of alliances that echoed Rome's diplomatic reach. Yet, tensions simmered. His Arian Christianity clashed with the Catholic majority, and his reliance on Gothic warriors alienated Roman elites. Late in his reign, fearing plots, he executed Boethius, whose Consolation of Philosophy, written in prison, became a cornerstone of medieval thought. Theodoric's death in 526 left his kingdom vulnerable, its succession disputes inviting Eastern intervention. The Eastern Empire, under Justinian, saw the West's fragmentation as an opportunity to restore Roman unity. From 527 to 565, Justinian pursued an ambitious reconquest, sending Belisarius to reclaim lost territories. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa fell swiftly in 533, its wealth and grain restoring Constantinople's resources. Italy proved harder. The Gothic War, from 535 to 554, was a brutal campaign that saw Belisarius and later Narses wrestle control from the Ostrogoths. Ravenna fell in 540, but resistance persisted under Gothic leaders like Totila. The war devastated Italy, depopulating cities and ruining farmland. Rome changed hands multiple times, its population shrinking to a few thousand. When the East finally prevailed, Italy was a hollow prize, its infrastructure shattered. Justinian's reconquests extended to southern Spain, but holding these territories strained the empire. The plague of Justinian, raging from 541 to 549, killed up to a quarter of the population, undermining military and economic recovery. Italy, barely recovered, fell to the Lombards in 568, a Germanic people who established a kingdom that endured for centuries. The Franks, under Clovis and his Merovingian successors, were the West's rising power. Clovis's victory over the Visigoths at Voulaye in 507 secured Gaul, while his conversion to Catholic Christianity aligned him with the Church and Gallo-Roman elites. His sons expanded Frankish rule, their courts at Soissons and Orléans blending Roman and Germanic traditions. They minted coins with Roman imagery, employed Roman administrators, and patronized monasteries. The Frankish kingdom, though often divided among heirs, laid the foundations of medieval France, its laws and language rooted in Rome's legacy. In Spain, the Visigoths, under kings like Leovigild, who ruled from 568 to 586, consolidated power, conquering the Suebi and issuing the Codex Euritianus, a law code blending Roman and Germanic principles. Their conversion to Catholicism in 589 under Reshaped unified the peninsula, strengthening ties with the Church. The Church was the West's anchor. Bishops like Caesarius of Arles, who died in 542, preached unity and charity, their sermons preserving Latin rhetoric. Monasteries, following Benedict's rule, spread across Gaul and Italy, their scriptoria copying Virgil and Augustine alongside Scripture. The Church's landholdings grew, making it a rival to secular lords. Gregory the Great, Bishop of Rome from 590 to 604, was a towering figure, reforming church administration and sending missionaries to England, where Augustine of Canterbury converted the Anglo-Saxons by 597. His writings, blending Roman philosophy with Christian theology, shaped medieval spirituality. The Church's influence bridged Roman and barbarian worlds, its rituals offering continuity amid change. Yet its growing power sparked tensions, as kings and nobles vied for control of bishoprics and monasteries. Economic life in the West was localized. The Mediterranean trade that once fueled Rome's wealth had collapsed, disrupted by Vandal and Lombard raids. Cities like Marseille and Toledo persisted as trade hubs, but most exchange was regional, with barter replacing coinage. Rural estates, or villae, were the economic backbone, their tenants bound to lords in a precursor to serfdom. The East, with its access to Silk Road goods, remained vibrant, its bezants circulating as far as Gaul. The West's agrarian economy, though simpler, was resilient, supporting growing populations as climate stabilized. Archaeological evidence, like pottery from 6th century Gaul, shows continuity in craftsmanship, blending Roman and barbarian styles. Environmental challenges lingered. The late antique Little Ice Age, though easing by the 6th century, had left scars, abandoned fields, silted rivers, and deforested hills. The plague of Justinian's recurring waves weakened urban centers, though rural areas, less dense, fared better. Soil recovery in Gaul and Spain, aided by crop rotation, supported barbarian kingdoms, but Britain, isolated, struggled against Saxon incursions. The East, with its fertile provinces, recovered faster, its granaries feeding Constantinople. The West's environmental recovery was slower, its reliance on local resources, shaping a decentralized economy. The barbarian kingdoms were Rome's heirs, not its destroyers. The Visigoths in Spain preserved Roman aqueducts, their kings ruling from Toledo in Roman-style palaces. The Franks adopted Roman titles, their bishops quoting Cicero. In Italy, the Lombards, though less Romanized, maintained Ravenna's churches. These kingdoms saw Rome as a model, their elites learning Latin and commissioning Roman-style art. The Church amplified this legacy, its liturgy steeped in Roman tradition. Roman law influenced barbarian codes, from the Salic law of the Franks to the Breviary of Alaric in Visigothic Spain. Latin, evolving into Romance languages, ensured Rome's linguistic endurance. The fall of the West was a tapestry of loss and renewal. Economic collapse, from severed trade to plague-driven depopulation, crippled the empire. Military reliance on barbarians shifted power to warlords, while environmental stressors strained resources. The Church's rise and barbarian integration forged a new identity, blending Roman and Germanic elements. The East's survival, with its strategic capital and robust economy, underscores the West's vulnerabilities: open frontiers, a fractured elite, and lost provinces. Yet Rome's legacy thrived in the West's new kingdoms, their laws, faith, and culture carrying the empire's torch. Roman roads linked Frankish villages, aqueducts watered Visigothic fields, and churches echoed with Latin hymns. To ponder this era is to see the resilience of human societies. The empire's end was not a failure, but a metamorphosis, its institutions adapting to new realities. The Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards built on Rome's foundations, their realms the seeds of modern Europe. The Church, with its vision of eternal salvation, preserved knowledge and unity. Rome's fall was a beginning, its ideas shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of this period is one of endurance, a reminder that even in collapse, a civilization's essence can endure, its light shining through the ages. The Western Roman Empire's demise was a quiet unraveling, its once vast dominion reduced to scattered enclaves by the 6th century, while new powers rose from its ashes. The Eastern Empire, gleaming in Constantinople, preserved the Roman name, its wealth and armies a distant echo of the West's faded glory. Yet the West was not a wasteland. It was a crucible where Roman traditions fused with barbarian energy, crafting a new world under the watchful eye of the Christian Church. The forces that toppled the empire, economic decay, military collapse, environmental strain, and cultural shifts, were not mere destroyers. They were midwives to a new era. To explore this time is to witness a civilization's metamorphosis, its legacy enduring in the laws, languages, and faiths of its successors, a testament to Rome's indelible mark on history. Justinian's ambition to restore the Roman Empire, from 527 to 565, was a fleeting triumph. His general Belisarius reclaimed North Africa in 533, shattering the Vandal kingdom and restoring grain supplies to Constantinople. The Gothic War in Italy, from 535 to 554, was costlier. Belisarius captured Ravenna in 540, but Ostrogothic resistance under Totila prolonged the conflict, devastating Italy's cities and countryside. Rome, already a shadow of its former self, was besieged multiple times, its aqueducts cut, and its population reduced to a few thousand. By 554, Narses, Justinian's successor general, secured victory, but Italy was ruined, its fields fallow, and its people exhausted. Justinian's conquests extended to southern Spain, but the empire overreached. The plague of Justinian, from 541 to 549, killed millions, slashing tax revenues and military recruits. The Lombards, a Germanic tribe, invaded Italy in 568, seizing most of the peninsula and undoing Justinian's gains. His Corpus Juris Civilis, a codification of Roman law, outlasted his military victories, shaping legal systems across medieval Europe. The Frankish kingdom, under the Merovingian dynasty, emerged as the West's dominant power. Clovis's successors, like Clotho I, who ruled until 561, expanded Frankish control over Gaul, defeating Burgundians and absorbing their lands. Frankish kings adopted Roman titles, minting coins with imperial imagery, and ruling from cities like Paris, a former Roman hub. Their alliance with the Catholic Church, cemented by Clovis's conversion in 496, gave them legitimacy among Gallo-Roman elites. Bishops, like Remigius of Rheims, advised kings, their dioceses preserving Roman administrative structures. Frankish law codes, like the Pactus Legis Salicae, blended Germanic customs with Roman principles, regulating land and justice. Yet, the Merovingian habit of dividing the kingdom among heirs sparked civil wars, weakening central authority and foreshadowing the rise of regional lords. In Spain, the Visigoths solidified their rule. Leovigild, from 568 to 586, subdued the Suebi and united the peninsula, his capital at Toledo, a center of Roman-style governance. His son Ricard's conversion to Catholicism in 589 aligned the Visigoths with the Church, ending Arian Catholic tensions and fostering unity. Visigothic law codes, like the Liber Iudiciorum, drew heavily on Roman law, governing Romans and Goths alike. Toledo's churches, built in Roman basilica style, reflected a blend of cultures, their arches and mosaics echoing Ravenna's. The Visigoths saw themselves as Rome's heirs, their kings wearing crowns and issuing edicts in Latin. Yet, internal strife and weak succession plagued their kingdom, leaving it vulnerable to later Arab invasions in 711. The Church was the West's unifying thread. Gregory the Great, Bishop of Rome, from 590 to 604, transformed the papacy into a moral and political force. He negotiated with Lombard kings, fed Rome's poor, and sent missionaries to England, where Augustine of Canterbury converted King Ethelbert of Kent by 597. Gregory's writings, like his pastoral care, guided clergy across Europe, blending Roman discipline with Christian ethics. Monasteries, like Monte Cassino, founded by Benedict, preserved Roman texts, Virgil, Cicero, and Seneca, while training scribes who spread literacy. The Church's wealth, from land donations, rivaled that of kings, but its spiritual authority transcended borders, offering hope in a fractured world. Yet, its growing power stirred conflicts with secular rulers, who sought to control bishoprics and monastic lands. Economic life in the West was starkly different from Rome's peak. The Mediterranean trade networks, once the empire's lifeblood, had withered under barbarian raids and plague. Cities like Rome and Milan survived as religious centers, but their markets were local, their populations a fraction of their former size. Rural estates dominated, their lords providing protection in exchange for labor, a system that hardened into feudalism. In Gaul, archaeological finds, like 6th century pottery, show continued trade with the East, but on a smaller scale. The Franks and Visigoths minted silver coins, imitating Roman designs, but barter was common in rural areas. The Eastern Empire, with its access to Asian trade, thrived, its gold solidus a standard currency. The West, isolated, relied on agriculture, its manners self-sufficient but limited. Environmental recovery was slow. The late antique Little Ice Age's cooler climate had eased, but centuries of deforestation and soil erosion hampered agriculture. In Gaul, crop rotation and fallowing revived some fields, supporting Frankish expansion. Spain's Visigoths maintained Roman irrigation systems, boosting yields. Britain, cut off from continental trade, struggled, its Romano-British communities facing Saxon pressure. The plague of Justinian's aftershocks lingered, with smaller outbreaks weakening urban populations. The East, with its fertile Nile and Anatolian plains, recovered faster, its cities rebounding from plague losses. The West's rural focus, while limiting growth, shielded it from urban pandemics, its scattered settlements more resilient to disease. Barbarian kingdoms were not Rome's gravediggers but its torchbearers. The Franks preserved Roman roads, their monasteries copying Latin manuscripts. Visigothic Spain maintained aqueducts, its courts quoting Roman poets. The Lombards in Italy, though less Romanized, adopted Christian rituals and Roman building techniques. These kingdoms saw Rome as a golden standard, their elites learning Latin and commissioning Roman-style art. The Church amplified Rome's legacy, its liturgy and canon law steeped in Roman tradition. Latin, evolving into French, Spanish, and Italian, ensured linguistic continuity. Roman law shaped barbarian codes, from Frankish inheritance laws to Visigothic property rights, anchoring medieval legal thought. The West's fall was a complex interplay of collapse and renewal. Economic isolation, from lost trade to plague-driven depopulation, starved the empire. Military dependence on barbarian warlords eroded central power, while environmental challenges strained resources. The Church's ascent and barbarian integration forged a new cultural synthesis, blending Roman and Germanic roots. The East's endurance, with its fortified capital and vibrant economy, highlights the West's weaknesses, exposed borders, a fractured tax base, and reliance on unstable allies. Yet, Rome's legacy flourished in the West's new realms, their laws, faith, and architecture carrying the empire's spirit. Roman bridges spanned Frankish rivers, Visigothic churches echoed Roman basilicas, and monks chanted Latin psalms. To reflect on this era is to see a civilization's resilience. The empire's end was a transformation, its institutions adapting to new realities. The Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards built on Rome's foundations, their kingdoms the roots of modern Europe. The Church, with its universal vision, preserved knowledge and unity, its missionaries spreading Rome's spiritual legacy. Rome's fall was a new dawn, its ideas shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of this period is one of continuity, a reminder that even in decline, a civilization's essence can endure, its influence woven into the fabric of history. The Western Roman Empire's collapse was not a single moment of ruin, but a gradual fading, its once mighty cities and legions giving way to a new tapestry of kingdoms by the 6th century. The Eastern Empire, resplendent in Constantinople, carried forward the Roman legacy, its bustling ports and impregnable walls a world apart from the West's scattered remnants. Yet the West was not erased. It was reborn, its Roman roots entwined with barbarian vitality, guided by the Christian Church's unifying hand. The forces that dismantled the empire, economic stagnation, military fragility, environmental hardship, and cultural transformation, reshaped it into something new, a foundation for medieval Europe. To explore this era is to see a civilization's enduring spirit, its ideas and institutions adapting to survive, leaving a legacy that echoes through the ages. The Gothic War, from 535 to 554, had left Italy a wasteland. Justinian's dream of restoring Roman unity, pursued through his generals Belisarius and Narses, culminated in the defeat of the Ostrogoths, but at a staggering cost. Rome, repeatedly besieged, was a hollow shell, its population barely a few thousand, its aqueducts broken, and its forums overgrown. Ravenna, once Theodoric's glittering capital, survived as a Byzantine outpost, its mosaics a fading testament to a lost era. The war's toll extended beyond Italy. The Eastern Empire's treasury was drained, its armies stretched thin, defending far-flung territories. The Lombards' invasion in 568, just 14 years after the Gothic War's end, shattered Justinian's gains. Led by Alboin, the Lombards seized northern Italy, establishing a kingdom that endured for 2 centuries. Byzantine control shrank to coastal enclaves like Ravenna and Rome, their governors struggling to maintain order amid local unrest. In Gaul, the Franks solidified their dominance. Clothar I's death in 561 left the Frankish kingdom divided among his sons, but their realm, stretching from the Rhine to the Pyrenees, was a powerhouse. Frankish kings like Chilperic I, who ruled until 584, governed with Roman efficiency, their palaces in Metz and Soissons, modeled on imperial villas. They patronized bishops like Venantius Fortunatus, whose poetry blended Latin elegance with Christian devotion. The Church was a key ally, its monasteries preserving Roman texts and its clergy advising on law and diplomacy. The Salic law, updated in the 6th century, regulated inheritance and justice, its Roman influences clear in property and contract rules. Yet Frankish unity was fragile, sibling rivalries sparked wars, and powerful nobles, precursors to feudal lords, began carving out autonomous domains. Visigothic Spain, under kings like Athanagild, who ruled from 554 to 567, was a bastion of Roman continuity. Toledo, the Visigothic capital, hosted councils where bishops and nobles debated law and faith, their proceedings recorded in Latin. The Visigoths' conversion to Catholicism in 589 under Ricard fostered unity, aligning them with Hispano-Roman elites. Their law codes, like the Liber Judiciorum, applied to all subjects, blending Roman legal principles with Germanic customs. Visigothic churches, like San Juan de Baños, echoed Roman architecture, their stone arches and frescoes a nod to classical aesthetics. Yet, internal divisions persisted. Succession disputes and noble revolts weakened the kingdom, foreshadowing its collapse to Arab invaders in 711. The Church's influence was profound. Gregory the Great's papacy, from 590 to 604, marked a turning point. He reformed church finances, negotiated peace with the Lombards and wrote extensively, his Dialogues in Moralia, shaping medieval theology. His mission to England, led by Augustine of Canterbury, converted the Anglo-Saxons, establishing a Christian foothold by 597. Monasteries, like those in Luxeuil and Bobbio, founded by Columbanus, spread Irish monasticism, their scribes copying Roman and Christian texts. The church's landholdings grew, making it a rival to secular powers. Bishops, like Isidore of Seville, who died in 636, were scholars and statesmen, his etymologies preserving Roman knowledge for posterity. The church bridged Roman and barbarian worlds, its liturgy and canon law rooted in Rome's legacy. Economic life in the West was fragmented. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was disrupted by Lombard and Arab raids, severing trade links. Cities like Toledo and Paris persisted as administrative centers, but their economies were local, their markets trading grain and wool. Rural manors, worked by tenant farmers, dominated, their lords offering protection in exchange for loyalty, a system hardening into feudalism. Frankish and Visigothic coins, often silver, imitated Roman designs, but their circulation was limited. The Eastern Empire, with its gold solidas, dominated long-distance trade, its merchants bringing silk and spices to Constantinople. The West, cut off, relied on agriculture, its villages self-sufficient but isolated. Archaeological evidence, like 6th century amphorae in Gaul, suggests some trade with the East, but it was a shadow of Rome's commercial web. Environmental conditions were stabilizing, but scars remained. The late antique Little Ice Age's cooler climate had receded, and warmer temperatures by the 6th century boosted crop yields in Gaul and Spain. Visigothic irrigation systems, inherited from Rome, sustained agriculture, while Frankish farmers adopted three-field rotation, increasing productivity. Deforestation and soil erosion, however, limited expansion, and abandoned Roman fields in Britain and northern Gaul reverted to forest. The plague of Justinian's aftershocks, with outbreaks into the 590s, kept urban populations low, though rural areas recovered faster. The East, with its fertile provinces, supported dense cities, its granaries feeding Constantinople. The West's rural focus, while limiting trade, shielded it from pandemics, its scattered settlements more resilient. Barbarian kingdoms were Rome's successors, not its foes. The Franks maintained Roman bridges, their bishops quoting Seneca. Visigothic Spain preserved aqueducts, its courts steeped in Roman rhetoric. The Lombards, though initially disruptive, adopted Roman building techniques, their churches in Pavia reflecting classical influences. These kingdoms saw Rome as a model, their elites mastering Latin and commissioning Roman-style art. The church was Rome's greatest heir, its monasteries preserving Pliny and Augustine, its liturgy echoing Roman cadences. Latin, evolving into Romance languages, ensured linguistic continuity, while Roman law shaped barbarian codes, from Frankish marriage laws to Visigothic land rights. The West's fall was a convergence of crises and adaptations. Economic isolation, from collapsed trade to plague losses, crippled the empire. Military reliance on barbarian warlords shifted power, while environmental challenges strained agriculture. The church's rise and barbarian integration created a new cultural synthesis, blending Roman and Germanic traditions. The East's survival, with its fortified capital and vibrant trade, underscores the West's vulnerabilities: open borders, a weak tax base, and fragmented governance. Yet Rome's legacy thrived in the West's new kingdoms, their laws, faith, and architecture carrying the empire's essence. Roman roads linked Visigothic towns, Frankish monasteries housed Latin manuscripts, and churches rang with Roman hymns. To reflect on this period is to see a civilization's enduring strength. The empire's end was a rebirth, its institutions evolving to meet new challenges. The Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards built on Rome's foundations, their realms the precursors of modern Europe. The Church, with its universal mission, preserved knowledge and unity, its missionaries spreading Rome's spiritual legacy. Rome's fall was a new beginning, its ideas shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of this era is one of transformation, a reminder that even in collapse, a civilization's spirit can endure, its influence woven into the tapestry of history. The Western Roman Empire's end was a silent ebb, its grandeur dissolving into a patchwork of kingdoms by the 6th century, each carrying fragments of Rome's legacy. The Eastern Empire, vibrant in Constantinople, upheld the Roman name, its markets and armies a distant mirror to the West's faded might. Yet, the West was not lost. It was transformed, its Roman heritage blending with barbarian strength, anchored by the Christian Church's enduring presence. The forces that felled the empire, economic decline, military collapse, environmental stress, and cultural shifts, did not erase it, but reshaped it, forging the roots of medieval Europe. To delve into this era is to witness a civilization's resilience, its ideas enduring in new forms, a testament to Rome's lasting influence on the world. The Lombard invasion of Italy in 568 marked a new chapter in the West's post-Roman evolution. Led by Alboin, the Lombards swept through the peninsula, capturing cities like Pavia and Milan, establishing a kingdom that fragmented Byzantine control to coastal enclaves like Ravenna and Rome. Unlike Theodoric's Ostrogoths, the Lombards were less Romanized, their early rule marked by raids and loose governance. Yet, over time, they adopted Roman practices, minting coins and patronizing churches. Kings like Othari, who ruled from 584 to 590, sought to unify their realm, marrying Catholic princesses to ease tensions with the Church. Lombard law codes, issued in the 7th century, drew on Roman models regulating land and trade. Their churches, like San Sofia in Benevento, echoed Roman basilicas, their stonework blending Germanic and classical styles. The Lombards' presence ensured Italy's division, a pattern that persisted into the medieval period. In Gaul, the Franks were the West's preeminent power. The Merovingian kings, like Guntram, who ruled until 592, governed a realm stretching from the Loire to the Rhine. Their capitals, like Orleans and Reims, retained Roman urban layouts, their palaces built on imperial foundations. Frankish elites, often Gallo-Roman aristocrats, preserved Latin literacy, their children studying Cicero alongside Scripture. The Church was a vital partner. Its bishops like Gregory of Tours, who died in 594, chronicling Frankish history in his 10 books of histories. His work, written in Latin, preserved Roman narrative traditions while documenting the Franks' rise. Frankish law, updated in the 6th century, balanced Germanic customs with Roman property rights, ensuring stability. Yet Merovingian infighting weakened the dynasty, empowering nobles who laid the groundwork for the Carolingian ascent. Visigothic Spain was a bastion of Roman continuity. King Leovigild, from 568 to 586, centralized power, minting gold coins in Roman style and fortifying Toledo as a royal seat. His son Ricard's conversion to Catholicism in 589 unified the kingdom, aligning it with the Church and Hispano-Roman elites. The Visigoths' law codes, like the Liber Judiciorum, applied uniformly, drawing on Roman legal traditions to govern marriage and inheritance. Toledo's councils, attended by bishops and nobles, mirrored Roman senatorial debates, their decrees shaping a Christian society. Visigothic architecture, like the Church of San Pedro de la Nave, blended Roman arches with Germanic motifs, a visual synthesis of cultures. Yet, factionalism and weak kings left the kingdom vulnerable, its collapse to Arab invaders in 711, a stark reminder of internal fragility. The Church was the West's cornerstone. Isidore of Seville, bishop from 600 to 636, was a scholar whose etymologies compiled Roman and Christian knowledge, a vital link to antiquity. His work influenced medieval education, its Latin preserving Rome's linguistic heritage. Monasteries, like Iona in Scotland, founded by Columba, spread Celtic Christianity, their scribes copying Roman texts. The papacy, under figures like Pelagius II, who died in 590, negotiated with Lombards and Franks, asserting spiritual authority. The Church's missions, like those to the Anglo-Saxons, converted kingdoms, tying them to Rome's legacy. Its wealth, from land grants, made it a political force, though tensions with kings over appointments foreshadowed medieval struggles. The Church's liturgy, steeped in Roman cadences, unified diverse peoples, its hymns echoing in Frankish and Visigothic halls. Economic life in the West was localized but resilient. Mediterranean trade, disrupted by Arab and Lombard raids, was minimal, with ports like Marseille handling limited goods. Inland, manors dominated, their tenants bound to lords in a proto-feudal system. Frankish and Visigothic coins, often debased, circulated locally, while barter prevailed in rural areas. The Eastern Empire, with its gold solitus, dominated global trade, its markets rich with silk and ivory. The West's agrarian economy, supported by improving climate, sustained growing populations. Archaeological finds like 6th century glassware in Gaul suggest small-scale trade, often church-driven, linking monasteries to Byzantine ports. Roman roads, though worn, facilitated local exchange, their stones trodden by Frankish merchants. Environmental conditions were improving. Warmer temperatures by the 6th century lengthened growing seasons, boosting yields in Gaul and Spain. Visigothic aqueducts, maintained from Roman designs, irrigated fields, while Frankish farmers reclaimed marshlands. Deforestation and soil erosion, however, limited expansion, and plague outbreaks, though less severe, lingered into the 590s. Britain, isolated, faced agricultural decline, its Romano-British communities yielding to Anglo-Saxon settlers. The East, with its fertile provinces, supported urban recovery, its cities like Antioch thriving. The West's rural focus, while constraining trade, ensured food security, its villages adapting to environmental shifts with Roman techniques like terracing. Barbarian kingdoms were Rome's heirs, not its ruin. The Franks preserved Roman baths, their bishops, quoting Ovid. Visigothic Spain maintained Roman bridges, its courts steeped in Latin oratory. The Lombards by the 7th century adopted Roman law, their kings ruling from Roman-style palaces. These kingdoms revered Rome, their elites mastering Latin and commissioning Romanesque art. The Church was Rome's greatest legacy, its monasteries preserving Pliny and Jerome, its canon law rooted in Roman principles. Latin, evolving into Romance languages, ensured linguistic continuity, while Roman law shaped barbarian codes, from Frankish inheritance to Visigothic contracts. The West's fall was a blend of collapse and renewal. Economic isolation, from severed trade to plague losses, weakened the empire. Military reliance on barbarian leaders shifted power, while environmental challenges strained resources. The Church's rise and barbarian integration forged a new identity, blending Roman and Germanic roots. The East's survival, with its strategic capital and robust economy, highlights the West's weaknesses, exposed frontiers, a fractured elite, and lost wealth. Yet Rome's legacy thrived in the West's new realms, their laws, faith, and culture carrying the empire's spirit. Roman aqueducts watered Visigothic fields, Frankish churches housed Latin scrolls, and monks chanted Roman psalms. To reflect on this era is to see a civilization's enduring power. The empire's end was a transformation, its institutions adapting to new realities. The Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards built on Rome's foundations, their kingdoms, the seeds of modern Europe. The Church, with its universal vision, preserved knowledge and unity, its missionaries spreading Rome's spiritual legacy. Rome's fall was a new dawn, its ideas shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of this period is one of continuity, a reminder that even in decline, a civilization's essence can endure, its influence woven into the fabric of history. The Western Roman Empire's fall was not a sudden cataclysm, but a gradual fading, its once grand cities and legions dissolving into a mosaic of new kingdoms by the 6th and 7th centuries. The Eastern Empire, flourishing in Constantinople, preserved the Roman legacy, its golden markets and formidable walls, a stark contrast to the West's fragmented remnants. Yet, the West was not obliterated. It was reborn, its Roman heritage interwoven with barbarian dynamism, guided by the Christian Church's steadfast presence. The forces that dismantled the empire, economic collapse, military weakness, environmental challenges, and cultural transformations, did not destroy it but reshaped it, laying the groundwork for medieval Europe. To explore this era is to witness a civilization's enduring vitality, its ideas and institutions adapting to new realities, leaving an indelible mark on history. In Italy, the Lombards' kingdom, established in 568, reshaped the peninsula's destiny. Initially a loose confederation of warrior bands, the Lombards under kings like Agilulf, who ruled from 590 to 616, adopted Roman administrative practices. Pavia, their capital, became a center of governance, its royal mint producing coins modeled on Byzantine designs. Lombard law codes, like the Edictum Rothari of 643, blended Germanic customs with Roman legal principles, regulating property and family disputes. The Lombards' gradual conversion to Catholicism, accelerated by Queen Theodelinda's influence, aligned them with the Church, fostering ties with Roman elites. Churches like San Michele in Pavia, with their Romanesque arches, reflected a synthesis of cultures. Yet, the Lombards' decentralized rule, with dukes holding semi-autonomous power, prevented true unity, leaving Italy divided between Lombard territories and Byzantine enclaves, like the Exarchate of Ravenna. The Franks, under the Merovingian dynasty, dominated Gaul. Kings like Childebert II, who ruled until 595, governed a realm that preserved Roman infrastructure, from roads to amphitheaters. Their courts in Metz and Paris employed Gallo-Roman administrators, whose Latin correspondence echoed imperial bureaucracy. The Church was a cornerstone, its bishops like Desiderius of Cahors, who died in 655, managing cities and advising kings. Gregory of Tours' histories, completed in the 590s, documented Frankish triumphs while preserving Roman literary traditions. The Salic law, refined over decades, balanced Roman and Germanic norms, ensuring stable inheritance and trade. Yet Merovingian power waned as noble families, like the Arnulfings, gained influence, their wealth from church lands and trade foreshadowing the Carolingian rise. By the 7th century, the Franks were a Christian kingdom, their monasteries, like Corbie, copying Roman texts, their faith uniting diverse peoples. Visigothic Spain, under kings like Sisebut, who ruled from 612 to 621, was a beacon of Roman continuity. Toledo's councils, blending secular and ecclesiastical authority, issued decrees in Latin, their format reminiscent of Roman senates. The Liber Judiciorum, promulgated in the 650s, unified Gothic and Roman subjects under a single code, its roots in Roman law evident in property and contract clauses. Visigothic churches, like Santa Maria de Melche, featured Roman vaults and mosaics, their builders trained in classical techniques. The Church, led by figures like Isidore of Seville, whose death in 636 marked a scholarly peak, preserved Roman knowledge, his works studied across Europe. Yet, Visigothic stability was fragile. Succession crises and noble revolts weakened the kingdom, culminating in its fall to Arab Berber forces in 711, a swift conquest that ended 7 centuries of Roman-influenced rule. The Church was the West's unifying force. The papacy, under Boniface IV, who died in 615, asserted spiritual leadership, converting Roman temples like the Pantheon into churches. Missions to England, building on Augustine's work, Christianized kingdoms like Northumbria by the 620s, tying them to Rome's orbit. Monasteries, like Wearmouth Jarrow in Britain, produced scholars like Bede, whose Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written in the 730s, preserved Roman narrative styles. The Church's wealth from land grants made it a rival to kings, its bishops wielding civic power in cities like Tours and Seville. Its liturgy, rooted in Roman traditions, unified worship from Gaul to Spain, while its canon law, influenced by Roman legalism, governed clerical life. Yet, tensions with secular rulers over church appointments hinted at future conflicts, a prelude to medieval struggles between popes and emperors. Economic life in the West was agrarian and localized. Mediterranean trade, once Rome's lifeline, was a shadow of its former self, disrupted by Arab conquests in North Africa and the Levant. Ports like Lisbon and Narbonne handled regional goods, but long-distance commerce was rare. Manors, worked by tenant farmers, were the economic core, their lords amassing power through land and loyalty, a system solidifying into feudalism. Frankish and Visigothic coins, often silver, circulated in cities, but rural areas relied on barter. The Eastern Empire, with its bustling trade routes, exported ceramics and textiles, some reaching Western monasteries via church networks. Archaeological evidence, like 7th century wine amphorae in Gaul, suggests limited exchange, often tied to ecclesiastical centers. Roman roads, though crumbling, linked villages, their stones worn by pilgrims and merchants. Environmental conditions were stabilizing. Warmer climates by the 7th century boosted agriculture in Gaul and Spain, with Frankish farmers expanding arable land through forest clearing. Visigothic irrigation systems, inherited from Rome, sustained olive and wheat production. Britain, however, lagged, its fields yielding less as Anglo-Saxon settlers adapted Roman techniques. Plague outbreaks, though diminished, persisted into the 600s, keeping urban populations low. The East, with its fertile provinces, supported cities like Thessalonica, its granaries feeding millions. The West's rural economy, while less dynamic, was resilient, its villages weathering environmental shifts with Roman methods like crop rotation. Deforestation remained a challenge, limiting timber for construction, but stone, abundant from Roman ruins, supported new churches. Barbarian kingdoms were Rome's successors, not its destroyers. The Franks maintained Roman aqueducts, their bishops citing Augustine. Visigothic Spain preserved Roman baths, its courts quoting Roman poets. The Lombards, by the 7th century, adopted Roman law, their kings ruling from Roman-style palaces. These kingdoms revered Rome, their elites mastering Latin and commissioning Romanesque art. The Church was Rome's greatest heir, its monasteries preserving Livy and Gregory the Great, its liturgy echoing Roman cadences. Latin, evolving into Romance languages, ensured linguistic continuity, while Roman law shaped barbarian codes, from Frankish marriage laws to Visigothic land rights. The West's fall was a complex interplay of decline and renewal. Economic isolation, from lost trade to plague-driven losses, crippled the empire. Military dependence on barbarian warlords shifted power, while environmental challenges strained agriculture. The Church's ascent and barbarian integration forged a new identity, blending Roman and Germanic roots. The East's survival, with its fortified capital and vibrant economy, highlights the West's vulnerabilities: open borders, a fractured elite, and diminished wealth. Yet Rome's legacy thrived in the West's new realms, their laws, faith, and culture carrying the empire's spirit. Roman bridges spanned Frankish rivers, Visigothic churches housed Latin scrolls, and monks chanted Roman psalms. To reflect on this era is to see a civilization's enduring strength. The empire's end was a metamorphosis, its institutions evolving to meet new challenges. The Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards built on Rome's foundations, their kingdoms, the seeds of modern Europe. The Church, with its universal mission, preserved knowledge and unity, its missionaries spreading Rome's spiritual legacy. Rome's fall was a new beginning, its ideas shaping the medieval world and beyond. The story of this period is one of resilience, a reminder that even in collapse, a civilization's essence can endure, its influence woven into the tapestry of history.